Thank you. Oh, it's kind of fun to turn the corner and there are all the people. Wonderful. It is so good to be here with you all today. What a great excuse to come and visit. So I've missed you all, and I am so lucky to be serving with such gifted people. So thank you for sharing your gifts with all of us. I do love the Gospel of Luke. I love that the Magnificat sets the whole scene for the book when Mary says, actually sings, God, you have put down the mighty from their seat and exalted the humble and meek. You have filled the hungry with good things and the rich sent away empty. Poor us. You have come to the aid of Israel, your servant, one of the poorest tribes in the area, mindful of your mercy, the promise you made to your ancestors, Sarah and Abraham, their descendants forever. Mary's song is given legs in this parable. Luke is the only gospel that tells this story. Some scholars say it was borrowed from an Egyptian tale, which I kind of like. It makes us share with other cultures. It is the only parable in all the Gospels that actually names a person. Lazarus, which means God has helped. That goes for all of us. Lazarus, now some scholars have named the rich man Dives. Now, that's just the Latin word, adjective, for rich. So I'm guessing that they probably used it to identify the two different speakers. This contrast in naming shows us right at the very beginning that this will be a parable of reversals. The rich were normally named in biblical times. They were thought to be blessed by God. You remember that old thing? While the poor were thought to be out of favor with God. So our story today is quite a reversal, but that's nothing new. The rich people in our country are well known. Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, George Soros, we all know their names. But not many of us know the name of a poor person or homeless person. They tend to be invisible. And if they aren't invisible, we work at making them so. In a book entitled Amazing Grace by Jonathan Kozol, he talks about the treatment of poor children in New York City and vividly portrays the devastating effects of poverty, that would be, on children and families in Mott Haven, including overcrowded schools, rat-infested homes, and limited opportunities. In fact, the ugliness of the area so offended the people passing by on the freeway that the city built a wall to hide the horrors of the area. Now, I just can't help but wonder if maybe they couldn't have taken the money that they built the wall with and maybe do something for the people. What a concept. Anyway, there are a number of contrasts in this parable. Rich and poor, dressed in purple, connoting royalty maybe, and in rags, feasting sumptuously and starving, named and nameless, invisible and noticed by all, heaven and hell, agony and comfort, a chasm that cannot be crossed in this world or in the next. Contrast seems to be growing today. Some of the top on my list are truth and falsehood, powerful and powerless, indifference and compassion, exclusion and inclusion, and as always, rich and poor. We could also throw in there progressive and conservative, violence and peace, hope and despair. In the Bible or in life today, we seem to see the contrast and put our arm out in opposition. Contrast can make things interesting, show another side of things, enrich the whole, make for growth. But too often, we let it set us apart, making us back away. Sometimes this is good for growth when we're trying to ponder something through, but to work towards the transformation of us all, we must stay connected, however hard it is. I kind of like the way artists use contrast with light and dark. Then they accentuate things and make the whole work together. Maybe we need to be more artistic in our lives. I confess that I have very little patience with the threat of going to hell to keep us on the straight and narrow. That is not my picture of God, nor does a God that threatens or bullies in order to force our compliance fit with my experience. But I have to be careful, as Anne Lamott says, you know you've created God in your own image when God hates the same people you do. There has to be a more appealing way to figure out how to bridge these gaps, more in line with the following the way of Christ, the way of love. Now, Gregory Boyle is one of the best people I can think of who works to make the invisible people, like Lazarus, visible. Father G, or Pops as he's affectionately known, is a Jesuit priest who has spent almost 4 decades working in LA with gang members from over 1,000 gangs in the area. He founded Homeboy Industries, the largest gang rehabilitation intervention in the world. It is probably instructive for us to think about in this time in our nation's history. Liberal and conservative seem to echo the same intense emotion as the enmity of gangs. So it is refreshing to look at the way Homeboy is creating a community of tenderness, of healing, and discovering the truth of who they really are. This strikes a note of hope for me to bridge our gap today. With all the destructive division, polarization, and disunion alive today, we need to understand that connection leads to healing and transformation. It leads us to our best selves, the self God created us to be. Now, as many of you know, Greg Boyle often takes 2 homies with him when he participates in lectures about the work they accomplish in healing deep wounds and building community. Once, he took a guy named Mario and Bobby actually, But Mario was the interesting one because he was the most tattooed person at Homeboy Industry. As they say, he was totally sleeved out. His face was black, his neck was black. When they went through the airport, mothers took their children over like this, and people turned their backs. The rejection was wholehearted and quite thorough. So they'd been asked to Gonzaga, Washington. So they gave their talks, and then Greg Boyle talked. They had told about all the horrors and tortures of their life in gangs and the deep wounds that they maintained from that. So after Greg's talk, there was a question and answer period. And the first question was from a woman in the front row. And she said, "You said you had 2 children approaching teenager years. And what wisdom or advice do you have for them?" Well, here's a guy who had been incredibly vulnerable, who had told all his war wounds and all his failures. And she asked him this question, what was he going to say? So he paused, he began to tear up, and he reached out to her, like begging her almost. And he said, "Oh, I hope he's not like me." She stood up. I hope I can get through this. She stood up and said, "No, no, no. You are kind. You are caring. I hope your children are just like you." And he broke down, just like I'm going to do. And the whole group stood up and clapped uproariously. They agreed, because no matter what he looked like on the outside, he was one of the world's gentlest souls. And everybody who knew him knew that about him. And that audience discovered it that day. So, as tattooed Mario exposed his wounds in front of the strangers, they lost their temptation to despise him and recognize themselves in that brokenness, revealing how connected we are regardless of differences, no matter how they voted. As the Dalai Lama says, everyone has a Buddha nature. One of our forms of protest is to locate ourselves with those who have been excluded. Or in Lazarus' case, locate ourselves with those not even seen. Not any effort to fix them or change them or make them like us. If the rich man had been able to even see, he might eventually have been able to find Lazarus and his shared humanity. And then both lives might have been transformed. Oh God, give us eyes to see our connections with one another, with you, and with the world. Amen.